Okay, so here we have the 4 of the 5 CRUD operations that we're implementing, right? We're able to select one by ID, select many, delete. We can create, right? So let's do the last one that we are able to update a selected website, right? So for instance, we would like to have here an additional button that will allow us to update the website, right? Also submit, but like this, there's no way for the controller to distinguish which button you clicked, right? So we'd like to be able to interpret the data differently depending on what action you're asking. So we could add some meta information here. We can name this button to, we can name it, give it a name, and we can say action, and we give it a value as well, so that when it gets submitted, it will be added to the query or the request that goes out to the server. And we say that this is an update, right? So now we have a default, right? If I don't tell you, then you're creating. But if you're posting and I tell you that the action is update, I'm going to instead reinterpret these as an update as opposed to a create, right? So that if I refresh this, notice that we have an update, right? Button. But if it's an update, we need some additional information, right? We need to know, what are you updating, right? You're updating what, which website are you updating? So we're going to need to pass along the ID of the website that we're updating, right? So we need an input field whose value, right, is the ID, right? So something like website ID, right? And so that we can pass it along to the when we post it, we can pass along the name as the ID, right? Now we don't have currently the website ID. We can certainly grab it here, string website ID. We can grab it, and by default it could be empty string, and we can initialize it here to be website ID equal website dot get ID. Yes. Let's see if we refresh this. Oops. Cannot convert int to string. Oh, okay. Right. So this is an integer. The ID is an integer. So I guess we could declare this. I want to leave it as an integer. I mean, as a string, because I want it to be empty, an empty string if I don't have the ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert the integer to a string just by concatenating an empty string. Right. So if I refresh this again, the ID. Wait, that's the ID? No, that's not it, right? That can't be true. What? Oh, I didn't close the string here. Try it again. Okay, it's 3. So if I select one, okay, these are the IDs. There we go, right? So that's, but typically we don't want to show the ID to the end user, right? So, so what we could do is that we still need that input field because we need to pass it along to the server, right, for actually update. So we can just change this to be a type hidden, right, so that it's not rendered for the end user, but it's still part of the form. Okay, so that when I click on the update on the controller, now I can receive it as a post, and now I can grab a hold of the action here, and depending on the action, request.getParameter action, right? If the action is update, right? If update equals action, then I'm going to use the DAO, right? So let's grab the DAO. Let's move it up here, right? So if it's that, I'm going to need the ID as well. So let's retrieve the ID, which what do we call it? I think we called it just plain old ID, right? So let's grab that as a parameter. So ID, there's the ID, and we're going to parse it as an integer, right? So if ID is not null, So some validation here. We can parse the integer of the website ID, integer dot parse int ID, and then we can use the DAO to update. We can say website DAO dot update website, which apparently we have it implemented already. Pass the website ID, and we need a website object, right? A website object, and let's see. I think we were implementing a website object up here, right, before. So let's move this higher. Let's move it up here. That has a name, has a description. I'm just passing it along as an argument here, right, to update instead of a create. Yes? So what we're going to do here is that if it's an update, I'm going to do this. Else, right, I'm going to assume that it's still a create. Right? If it's not an update, it must be a create. Right? In both cases, I go to do get, which is going to fetch all the websites, presumably this new website, this updated website as well. Okay? So this updates and update. Does that work? We did, right? I guess we must have implemented in the previous class. All right, let's see if it works. Let's go back. Let's refresh. Let's choose W1. So let's change this to be 1, 2, 3, and 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, and let's click on update. And it looks like it updated. There it is, right? And so some gibberish. So updates, and it changes. And we can go back and see that it's changed. That makes sense? Okay. So there you go. So we implemented all 5 CRUD operations. And one of the things that I want to point out here is that the server, the controller has been implemented in what it's called a stateless controller. Right? The controller is not maintaining any information about the current user or the currently selected website. Even though I select the website, right? I select the website, and I can, if I refresh the page, it still remembers that is the website that is being selected. But notice that this state information is not being maintained by the server. The server has no idea that you selected that website, right? Instead, that information is being encoded as part of the URL. Okay, to reconstruct the state of the application, we are passing the encoded state, right, in the URL, and at that time is the state. We are reconstructing the state by fetching all the information from the database and then sending it back for rendering. So this stateless implementation makes our application easier to scale, right? Because it doesn't need to maintain information about any particular user. It doesn't need to remember anything, right? Instead, it's delegating the state information to all the views. The views are maintaining their own state, right? Whenever they need to reconstruct their state, they pass it to the server. The server goes and fetches everything, right? And then for that particular state, and then retrieves the information back to the views, and the views render themselves, right? If the server needed to remember, right, meaning maybe instead of maintaining it here in the URL, we could use maybe session information, application information. The server could do that. Right, but if we do that, then the server would need to remember more things in its limited footprint, right? In its limited RAM space. Right? Somewhere it needs to remember that, right? The more you ask it to remember, the more RAM it will need, right? And if it's just you, it doesn't really matter. But if it's thousands of people that it needs to remember about your particular conversation and your conversation and your conversation, right? You're talking about a larger footprint for your server. Okay, so as much as possible, we try to implement stateless applications, right, to make your application more scalable. Okay, obviously, this can only be this stateless implementation can only be can go so far. At some point, we do need to maintain some stateful information, at least maintaining who's the person that's currently logged in, right? For instance, right? and so that we don't have to maintain that in the URL, right? Because, I mean, what would we contain in the URL? The ID of the user? Maybe that's a security issue, right? Remember, passing this user information encoded in the URL or encoded in the post, that it could be intercepted by someone in between that could then pose as you, right? So that perhaps for security purposes, perhaps we might store that information on the server side as opposed to storing it encoded in the URL or encoded anywhere else, right? But that's talking about other things. Does this make sense? Okay. So this will be the focus of the next assignment, right? Of providing some way to access data. In this case, we're accessing data through a user interface, right? Ideally, you would also provide the same information, but not necessarily for human consumption. Right now, you are providing the data, but it's explicitly consumable by a human being. That a human being can click a button, can click a hyperlink, can select, delete, and send actions to be executed. Ideally, you would also be able to access this data, not necessarily for a human being, but an automated non-human actor, right? That could integrate with us, right? And ask the same information, but programmatically, as opposed to manually, like we're doing here, okay? For that, we need to provide an API, a web API, that would provide this data in some schema representation, in some object or representation, and that will be the focus of web services when we come back next time, right? We'll talk about web services. All right? All right, I'm going to leave it here.